the poetry of Goa's long-standing homes, identity, belonging, culture, community, architecture, home. Good morning. It's wonderful to be here and present our book, The Memory Keepers and Future Seekers, at this lovely homegrown the Goa Art and Literature Festival. Thank you all for joining us. Ulka, can you give us a brief overview of the book?
I would like to start at the very end of the book, the last chapter, House of Reflections, home of family Colasso on the beautiful Mandovi riverfront in Ribandar. If we can please have the first slide of the presentation. To quote homeowner Jyoti Botello, who you see on the screen behind, "We have had many offers for this house. There once was a man from the Middle East who said he wants to buy it. So I told him, you won't be able to afford it. And he said, yes, of course I can. I'll give you a blank check and you can write any amount you want." So she said, it is not that. If you buy the house, it is going to be just a house, like so many houses all over the world. But for us, it is home. And he said, gosh, you Indians are so emotional. And I said, yes, and we Goans are much more, unquote. This quote really sums up the true character and spirit of the book, The Memory Keepers and Future Seekers, portraits of heritage homes in Goa that are centuries old and built during the colonial Portuguese era. Through personal stories of families and their fragments of memory, the book also touches upon the larger moments of history that were instrumental in the making and shaping of Goa.
But we've been asked that there are so many homes in this particular style of architecture dotted through the narrow lanes of Goa. How did you choose these 6 and why only 6?
So each of the homes featured in the book are living and breathing. They continue to function as a center stage on which the daily rituals and rhythms of life play out. During the research phase of this project, I visited several Goan homes across the north and south before deciding to focus on 6 in particular. For me, it was important to strike that fine balance between breadth and depth in order to contextualize the work, but also to capture its very essence. So as you see on the slide behind, we featured 6 homes which were titled House of Belongings, of Confluence, House of Dialogue, Duality, Evergreen, and House of Reflections. Each of these names are a play on words that represent both the tangible and the intangible attributes that have made these homes unique. And Samira, can you please tell us now how an example of one of these play on words?
So if I take the Figueredo home, for instance, which we featured as the house of duality in the book, now visibly the home has been built in 2 wings, and one wing is believed to have been built 430 years ago and predate the Taj Mahal, and the other wing about 230 years ago. And this is Fatima Figueredo, who lives there now with her son Pedro, and she's multilingual, well-traveled, lived across Portugal, Mozambique, and Brazil before coming back to Goa to look after her mother and her heritage home. So, but apart from these visible dualities in the material structure and architecture of the home, it's also the inherent dualities in their identity that we wanted to sort of bring out. And I'll read from the text here. A hybrid mix of influences, the mansion holds many dualities within, glimpses of which can be seen throughout its many rooms. Leather-embossed, high-backed Portuguese chairs and church chairs from the period of King Jose I sit side by side with chairs carved with motifs from Hindu mythology. Snakes, winged creatures, lotus flowers, and even the Trimurti of Hindu gods, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. The magnificent altar pays homage to Saint Anne, the patron saint of the village of Luthole, and simultaneously cradles a baby Jesus depicted as baby Krishna. So, but apart from these, sort of like I said, what you can see in the home, it's how do these occupants see themselves? Elsewhere I write, when the imposing mansion holds up a mirror to the figuredos, do these Lotlikars see themselves as more Portuguese or more Indian? Where do they call home? Or do they see newly discovered facets of themselves glimmering in these reflective surfaces? And then to quote Fatima Figueiredo, she says, I am Portuguese. I was born Portuguese and I will die Portuguese. Of course, I never forgot my Indian origin. My roots are Indian. I am going to die here definitely one day, not in Portugal. Being Portuguese, but not in Portugal. Death will be here, unquote. So it was, these dualities that we were trying to bring out through the text. And, the intangible, what you can't see, and is reflected in their very identity and the architecture of their home. And speaking of the tangible, if we look at the next image, we have an image of the Disa Condillac family who are on their balcony or their veranda. And this is featured in the book as the House of Belongings. And in pre-Portuguese times, the rooms of a home opened onto an inner courtyard or angan. And with the arrival of the Portuguese, the center moved outward onto the balcony and life became more outward looking. And this became the place for gathering, for neighborliness, for gossip, for community. Ulka, your thoughts on this image?
So as Samira said, this is the home of the Disa Condillac family in Aldona, which features in the book as the House of Belongings. Here you see the family gathered in the balcony along with their beloved dogs, enjoying the warm afternoon sun. I particularly like the way the sunlight spotlights Maria's face, who you see sitting on your extreme right. And it's a fleeting moment in which none of the homeowners are conscious of the camera, except for their dog Simba, who you see sitting right behind Maria. He's looking straight onto the camera. Visually too, I love the color echo in this image. If you notice, the colors of the foreground, their attire, echo the background architectural colors of the yellow ochre and red oxide. To quote homeowner Lara, sitting on your left, we have a lot of naughty memories here, and there is a whole lot of nostalgia around this house. We used to have great fun exploring all its corners, going through all the old photographs. I spent so much time with the family, both those who are here and with those who are not, unquote.
And that's true. One always feels the presence of those who've gone before. And speaking of the intangible again, there are so many cliched ways of looking at Goa as a place of bohemian, hedonistic indulgence on its beaches, or as a place of sleepy, Susegad villages. But going beyond the balcony, meeting these homeowners, going into these stately, sophisticated homes, one gets an entirely different understanding of Goa and of Goans. And Goa is so much more than is commonly misrepresented. And, with 450 years of Portuguese rule, the fact that this tiny state was once the capital of the Portuguese Empire in the East, one of the largest maritime empires the world had ever seen, it's fascinating that Goa's architecture is not fully Portuguese, but fully Goan. And where an angan and an altar coexist in the same built space, as we saw in the Fernandez home in Chandor, which is featured in the book as the House of Confluence. I've spoken of the Figueiredo home. And in the Colasso home, which is the House of Reflections, we saw, just before the private chapel or oratorio, we saw a huge cabinet carved with scenes from the Ramayana. So the way this architectural imprint evolved into this sort of hybrid of both the indigenous and the cosmopolitan, this syncretic confluence of faith and culture. I mean, so visible in all of these homes. And it's really fascinating. It was quite enlightening for us. So, Ulka, you've spent so much time documenting these spaces and the lives lived within these age-old walls. Your images are so layered in what they reveal, what they withhold, and there are scenes within scenes in so many of them. What about the story of these Goan homes resonates with you?
So I'd like to quote Goan origin architect and urban planner Charles Correa. Certainly, architecture is concerned with much more than its physical attributes. It is a many-layered thing. Beneath and beyond the strata of function and structure, materials and texture, lie the deepest and most compulsive layers of all. As a photographer in the early days of the project, it was really the architectural aesthetics that spoke to me. You know, Goan homes are so visually rich. They truly are a photographer's paradise. Right from the vibrant hued facades, the textured and pigmented interior walls, the glittering crystal chandeliers, or the patterned mosaic flooring, even the oyster shell windows, everywhere I looked, there was something I could capture through my viewfinder. But the longer I worked on this project, I realized that it was not the physicality of the architecture or the antiques or the artifacts, but rather the stories and memories contained within them that had in turn captured me. And it is these stories and memories that I believe form the emotional foundations of what makes a house a home.
That's true. And can we have the next image? You know, you talked about the emotional foundations, and this image is so alive with the bond between these friends. Can you tell us more about this image?
So here is a picture of the Menezes Braganza home in Chandor, which features in the book as the House of Evergreen. Here you see Yvonne Menezes, homeowner, on your extreme right, and she's entertaining her friends over a long Sunday lunch. I specifically like the bond and the intimacy that she's sharing with her friends over this lunch, which started out in the Sala Pequena with soup, starter, and shandy before they moved on to the Sala Grande for the main meal. To quote her son Rohan, for many years after celebrating New Year's Eve, we would all gather in this house for my grandmother's birthday. The whole family would get together for lunch, and it was great. We would have 100 to 150 guests, all my aunts, uncles, granduncles, cousins, family from all over the world, from Brazil, Portugal, and London would come down, and we would have music in the ballroom and a huge feast. We would play all around the house. It was so much fun. Sadly, most of the older generation have passed away, and the family doesn't get together anymore. Unquote.
Yeah, well, I mean, there is this gentle emotive arc that flows through your images. And can you tell us more about the many-layered cover image and its significance to the book?
So the cover image is one of the many within the book that is now forever etched in my memory. It is a portrait of a quintessential Goan home, that of family Viegas, situated at the end of a picturesque Ashoka tree-lined street in the village of Kurturi in South Goa, which features in our book as the House of Dialogue. But at its core, it is a portrait of the elderly Marianne Viegas, and you can see her sitting right there, her fragile frame framed through several solid teakwood door frames. I like this picture because we see through a corridor of frames within frames that leads our eye right from the balcao, past the entrada, through the liminal space in which she sits, into the very heart of the home, the kitchen. But what I really love about the image is that we only catch a partial glimpse of her, and this creates a sense of mystery in terms of what she is doing. For example, when I first photographed her, I thought she was sitting at her breakfast table having her morning cup of tea or coffee, when in fact, she was sitting at what is her Bible table, practicing her morning ritual of coloring. an activity that had been prescribed by her daughter to stimulate her mind and boost her memory. So, as you can see, the narrative of this moment was also so very fitting to the narrative of the book, The Memory Keepers.
It's very fitting indeed. And it's such a poignant image. It really resonates with me too. And, in the book, of course, one gets a glimpse of these majestic homes, but it's more the stories and memories of their occupants that take center stage. And memory is not something linear, it's not rigid, it's not controllable, it's not even particularly reliable. But it's the ways, it's so deeply personal. And in a few years, there may be no one left to tell these stories. And in this image, for instance, we have Raphael. I found it profoundly moving to meet the memory keepers and see the ways in which they hold memory. And here Raphael is sitting in his sala or grand ballroom. And it's a very special memory for us that we were invited to his 92nd birthday party, where only immediate family were present. And Raphael's holding a copy of the Illustrated Weekly of India, probably from 1980, which asks, "Is Goa a paradise?" And inside there was a story on the iconic hippies of Goa, who eventually became synonymous with Goa. And Raphael has turned his sala into a library or into an archive. He cuts out articles from the newspaper, from magazines for this archive on the history of Goa. He has huge collection of rare books in English and Portuguese. And he's built this whole, papers, documents. He's a valuable resource for academics and scholars all across the world. And so he holds memory in this very physical sense. And then in the next image, we have Maria Teresa Colasso, who is sitting gracefully at the head of her 20-seater rosewood dining table with her caretaker by her side. And she lived alone in this stunning riverside home, which is featured in the book as the House of Reflections. And she was ailing, she was losing her memory, losing her speech, and she'd suffered a few falls. So her relatives took her to their home very close by, and they told us we had to bring her back, because even though she couldn't speak, she indicated very strongly she wanted to be back in her own home. And I found that really moving, that even though she couldn't remember much, she remembered where she wanted to be. She wanted to be in her own home. And she felt that powerful pull of the universal human instinct for home. And sadly, she passed away last year at the age of 94. Ulka, you've crisscrossed the world in your quest for images. You've lived across 4 countries and 4 continents. And with this book, you're working, looking at the lives of families who've lived in one home for generations. What has this process of working on this project meant to you? Was it a kind of homecoming for you too?
So after 2 decades of living abroad across countries and continents, I finally returned to India and soon after began this photographic exploration documenting the Goan homes. And indeed, it was a homecoming of sorts, Samira, because as I worked on this 4-year-long process, I began to feel right at home in Goa. Goa is truly so special, and in particular, these homes. They've seen the rise and fall of a whole empire. The land they stand on changed from being a Portuguese state for 450 years to then becoming a part of India upon liberation in 1961. But apart from these histories at large, these homes have been witnesses to life. Unlike the newly built homes, they have seen entire cycles of life play out within their walls, through the generations, through the centuries. We featured 6 homes in this book, and with each of the families, it's been their deep-rooted connectedness to the home and the land that has moved me. In a way, it has got me reflecting on my own sense of belonging and what home really means to me. As the iconic photographer Ansel Adams rightly says, the lens looks both ways, unquote.
And Thank you for that. Can you share a memory or a story from the book that reflects this deep sense of attachment to home?
So here behind you see a picture of homeowners Fatima and Pedro Figueiredo, who you spoke of earlier, Samira, in their home in Latoli, which features in the book as the House of Duality. Both mother and son moved back from Lisbon to Goa to look after their family home. To quote Fatima Figueiredo, "This house was requested by the Indian government twice, immediately after liberation by Nehru and some years later by Indira Gandhi. Indira Gandhi had a big desire and intent to acquire the house, so she sent some ministers to the home to negotiate, and my aunt at the time said, 'No, this is a family home.' These ministers told her, 'You cannot say no to the Prime Minister of India.' And she said, 'Yes, of course I can. She is not my mother-in-law.'"
Well, yeah, well, it's true. Architecture can really add such an emotional feel to a place. And apart from capturing memories and stories of the past, this book also serves to spark conversation about the futurity of these homes. As Alvaro Vegas of the Vegas home, featured in the book as the House of Dialogue, says, Goan homes are not merely the memory keepers, they are also future seekers. The house grows and lives with you. Nothing is permanent, everything is in transition, and change is inevitable. Unquote. Ulka, these images have an archival quality, and the Goa that we see here may not exist in a few years. Can you tell us more about the two-pronged title of this book, and what was your bigger aim with this book?
So the material culture contained within these walls and the vivid memories shared by its occupants really make history softly come into focus. But apart from looking at these homes as the memory keepers of the past, the book also gently serves to spark conversation about the futurity of these homes. How can these grand homes of the past adapt to the present and sustain the future on emotion alone? You know, especially at a time when Goa is undergoing a sea change with a proliferation of development, second homes, gastronomy, hospitality, and a whole new wave of people coming in from the cities to visit or to make it their home. It would be great if through this book, the love and appreciation we all have for Goa can go a little bit deeper to include this multi-layered, sophisticated, cultural and architectural side of Goa. And in doing so, I hope that the book can help bridge the two worlds of Goa, old and new, and also help bridge the two worlds of the insider and the outsider.
I hope so too. And your practice lies at the intersection of the two genres of street and documentary photography. Can you tell us more about your photography practice in this particular project?
My photography practice, yes, as you've said, Samira, lies at the intersection of street photography and documentary. Although this project is a documentary photographic exploration, my background in street photography has taught me the art of seeing the extraordinary in the ordinary humdrum moments of day-to-day life. So as you see on the portrait right behind me, this is a portrait of Ranjiv Fernandez in his home in Chandor, which features in the book as the House of Confluence. As you can see him sitting in his Voltaire chair reading the morning paper. In addition to portraits and candid moments of daily life that play out within the walls, the book also features wide-angle shots of the architectural spaces and close-ups of the objects, the China blue and white ceramics or the home altars, because the architecture, the occupants, and the objects are all keepers of memory in their own right. Speaking of my technique, I like to play with light, color, shadow, and composition to create a mood in my images, like these silhouetted window frames that you see on the screen behind. While Goan windows are more often portrayed from the outside, I've chosen to portray them as silhouettes from the inside looking out, onto a paddy and palm-fringed Goa, onto a Goa that is at once familiar, but at the same time changing.
Can you tell us more about how you started?
Yes, in the next slide. So going back in time, my relationship with photography started in the early 80s when my dad gifted me this red Olympus camera. I remember I was down with chickenpox and was in home quarantine, but I actively photographed everything in sight. And since then, a camera has really been my constant companion over the years. But it was not till I was back in home quarantine during the pandemic lockdown that my love for the craft developed further. And that's actually when the idea for this particular project came to me.
And before we wrap and take questions from the audience, can you read us an excerpt from the book?
So I started this conversation at the very end of the book, the last chapter. Now I'd like to end at the very beginning of the book by reading an excerpt from the foreword by Goan origin Nicole Ann Lobo, an art historian who is currently doing her PhD at Princeton on Goan art history. There is an old saying about history and memory. Where histories falter, memories take the reins. Goans are not a people without history, but inheritors of competing histories, constructed over millennia, shaped through centuries of colonial rule, and still not fully liberated. Often misunderstood as merely hybrid, Goan identities occupy a liminal space, the realm of the simultaneously indigenous and cosmopolitan. As a port, Goa long served as India's aperture to the rest of the world, chilies and marigold flowers, Western medicine, and the printing press. Many Goans converted to Catholicism and expanded the limits of institutional faith through vernacular expressions of devotion. They built lives that drew from myriad cultures and points of reference, brought to Goa through maritime trade. Where histories have imperfectly captured this liminality, Goan's memories have filled in the gaps.
Thank you for that. And thank you. It's been very special sharing these stories of the memory keepers with you all. And thank you, Heta, if the audience has any questions. Yeah.
Let's open it for Q&A. Would anybody like to ask a question or no?
Rabbi would like.
Yeah, sure. Of course. Got another mic? Yes. Okay, wonderful. I would be grateful if you could introduce yourself when you ask a question, please, so we know.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Iqbal Singh from St. Xavier's College. So my question to you is, it's very interesting how this book came to be. So I would like to know how you guys met and how this came to be, such a great project, and it takes a lot of time and effort to create something this special. So I would like to know how the process was.
Both answer that question. Thank you, Iqbal. So we actually worked on this for 4 years, and we met because Ulka had come to. I also work as an art curator and an art writer. So, she asked me to write for a photo series that she was doing to be submitted in an international photo festival in Switzerland. And it was a photo series on the houses of Goa, and very few at that time. So I wrote this little piece, and that was very well received. And then that sort of grew into this, I think her fascination sort of drove it. And it just grew into a larger project, And before we knew it, we were fully committed to working on these beautiful homes of Goa.
So for me, it really started during the pandemic. After having lived abroad for 20 years across countries and continents, I found myself during the pandemic locked down in my own family, my ancestral home in Bombay, and reflecting on this, what home really means to me. And it was also a time when I was, learning and growing my photography practice. And I chanced upon this book by the late fashion and fine art photographer Prabhuda Das Gupta, this beautiful book called Edge of Faith, with very soulful black and white photography on Goan homes. And that just moved me and inspired me to go visit these Goan homes. And one thing led to another, and we got deeper and deeper into it, and that's how this book really came about.
Thank you, everyone, for this question. Yes.
What's it? My question is, have you done any research on when the oldest Goan homes were, when land was cleared to make these beautiful old Goan homes? What was the difference between the destruction that caused to the landscape and to the destruction that is being caused today?
Introduction.
Meheru. My name is Meheru Jafar.
That's a very interesting question and comment. No, we did not do research because our book was primarily about memories and stories that the families hold within them. But yes, that does take me back to what it would have been like during that time, building these homes and how that would have changed the Goan landscape. Cut to now and how the newer homes are changing the landscape of Goa. So, yeah.
Samira, you want to take that talk? Yes, time for one move. Yeah. Can you introduce yourself?
I'm Darpan. And my question is actually, you touched upon it about why these 6 and why not more. I'm wondering, do you have like this whole spectrum of houses that you've already shot? Do you have like a lot of raw footage and then you selected these? Or just in terms of process, what was it? Like you found these interesting and then did a deep dive into these?
So yes, as I said, during the early research phase of the project, I visited several Goan homes and did photograph a lot of them. But it was very early on in that stage that I realized the ones that I kind of wanted to focus on. And those were a mix between the visual aesthetics that spoke to me, but also the kind of bond that we established with the families living in them. So it was this kind of inexplicable quality
Homed
of
in
why
on
these
these.
specific 6 homes.
A connection, I'm
A
assuming, to the...
a connect visually, but also,
with the people.
yeah. Yeah, I think that was how these 6
that
came
was how it
about.
evolved.
And do you
But
have
in terms of the photography, you asked about the footage of the other homes. It was really during this 4-year-long process that my archive of these homes developed, deeper. And so the ones that I photographed in the initial research phase, I did not go deeper into photographing them. So.
I'd be interested in seeing actually the ones that you didn't use also. These are amazing, but also the ones that you didn't use. Are you planning something with that?
Not at the moment, but they are a part of my archive, and hopefully someday I can do and exhibit them in a show or of sorts. But yeah, we should connect after this conversation.
Thank you for that.
My name's Augusto Pinto. From what I've seen so far, the pictures are of the families of some Goan Bhatkas. So it's interesting because for people like me, we don't always go in there. But these houses, as far as me or anybody else is concerned, they become part of our lives because of their exteriors rather than the interiors which you interestingly focused upon. We get to see what we don't. But what is important for us is the exterior. This is not so much a question, but just a comment. Sadly, these exteriors are often disappearing now, with large walls being built around them. I'm talking about in general, new houses coming up. And in fact, even if these houses are bought, these old houses are bought, then the new owners tend to build big walls around them, like you have in possibly North India or wherever. I don't know if you'd like to comment on this.
I mean, you're very
And
right.
whether we should have a smaller laws. There were laws, in fact, whether they should still be enforced of having smaller walls around our homes.
I mean, I don't know about the legal aspects of that, but you're very right in what you... Because when we were visiting these homes, what really struck us was also the sense of community and being part of a neighborhood. And they would tell us stories about how they would leave their doors open and people would... you take a shortcut through somebody else's home to get somewhere, which would never happen now. You'd probably be arrested. How would you even get in? So this whole sense of belonging to a neighborhood, belonging to something larger than just your own home, it was a really fascinating aspect for us. Yeah.
The literature, sorry.
Good morning, everyone. So my question to you is, what were the biggest challenges you faced while creating this book, whether logistically or in terms of capturing the stories and images? Oh, by the way, my name is Olivia Gomes. Yes.
Thanks for that question. So with any documentary project, the biggest challenge is really access and then trust. How do you get into the homes, and once you're in the homes, how do you establish that trust between yourself as a photographer, writer, and the families? I must say, from the early stages itself, we were welcomed with open doors into all the homes. Yes, the trust took a little longer, and it was a period of 4 years of visiting them repeatedly that the relationship with these families really developed. And it developed to a point where, as Samira says, we were invited to Rafael Villegas' 92nd birthday, where there was only immediate family present. We've had several cups of coffee, prawn rissoles and porto, and an elaborate Portuguese meals with the Figueiredo family, for instance. So it was really a process, this 4-year-long process, where the trust and relationship were built over time.
Hello, my name is Faith, and my question is why did you focus on more Portuguese-centric houses, like Portuguese Goan-centric houses, and why do you think that Goans as general readily accepted Portuguese influences into their homes? That's my question. Thank you.
During the research phase of this project, I was visiting several Goan homes, including some Hindu homes. But for the purpose of this particular project, I wanted to capture homes that are living and breathing, as I said, where the families continue to live in, and where the rituals, the moments of day-to-day life play out within these homes. So unfortunately, the ones that I visited, the Hindu homes, they were only visiting for festivities or, occasionally. So chose not to focus on that. And it was also a little bit of the visual, to keep it cohesive and succinct, we chose to focus rather than go wide and cover a breadth of them.
Thank you, Heta.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Okay. On behalf of Goa Art and Literature Festival and the ICG International Center Goa, and on behalf of Mr. Yatin Kakodkar, President of ICG, thank you all for attending this. And thank you both speakers, Samira and Ulka, for a lovely, stimulating, and meaningful conversation.